Teresa huddled fearfully in the corner of the bed and cried, unable to cope with another fit of hysteria. Every time Frederick looked at her like that, with his eyes glassy with anger, she knew a blow would follow, and she shook with terror and despair. "Frederick, I can't take it any more. You've locked me in the apartment like a prisoner, and you're using me as a thing," sobbed the girl. "I think I've already explained everything to you," he muttered, and moved closer to the girl, noting with pleasure the fear in her eyes. "I can't leave my wife, or I'll lose her millions. I'm with you, or is that not enough for you?" he whispered threateningly, grabbing Teresa painfully by the chin. The girl shook her head, and Frederick, feeling the pleasure of his power and control, smirked smugly. Then he walked out and locked the front door. Teresa felt relieved, but living in a locked apartment, waiting for a lover who would one day just kill her in a fit of rage, became unbearable. It all began 2 years ago, when Frederick looked into the cafe where Teresa was a waitress. He was 20 years older than her, but being a respectable man, he easily seduced the young beauty. A little attention, gifts, flowers, and Teresa just lost her head. Only 6 months later, Frederick informed her that he had a wife and that he would never leave her, as she was rich. Teresa made a scandal, and that's when he hit her for the first time. Teresa forgave everything, thereby dragging herself into a long, difficult relationship with the tyrant. He threatened her so much that for a long time she was afraid to even think about leaving him. When one day she did gather the courage to part with Frederick, he beat her so badly that she was still a month to recover from the beatings. Frederick threatened her that he had connections everywhere, and that if she dared to run away again, he would find out right away, and she would be in trouble. Frederick took away her phone and made her inform all her friends about her departure abroad, so no one would look for her. After that, he put the girl under house arrest. At that time, Teresa had to pretend that she had put up with it, but today she was ready to do whatever it took to get out of that hell for good. The girl went to the window and looked down. The apartment where Frederick was holding her was on the 4th floor. There was only one way out. Teresa gathered all the sheets in the house and made a rope, but it was only enough to reach the middle of the 2nd floor. "Well then, I'll have to jump. It's now or never," she thought, and began to go down. 2 years had passed. Teresa cleared the last table and looked at her watch. Today was the anniversary of her and Owen's first meeting, and he had invited her to the restaurant to celebrate. At the thought that Owen might propose to her tonight, Teresa's heart raced, and she sat down for a few minutes to calm down and get her thoughts in order. Her left ankle ached again, as it usually did for the weather, and rubbing her foot she remembered her escape again. Teresa had hurt her ankle the night she had escaped from the apartment, but despite the intense pain, she had managed to get to her friend, whom Frederick didn't know about. She had been hiding at her place for a couple of weeks, and during that time she had prepared everything for her move to the capital, fearing every day that Frederick would find her. After hitching a ride into the city, she rented a quiet place on the outskirts of town and took a job in a small cafe. She did not tell any of her relatives where she was. A year later, she met Owen. He noticed the sad, beautiful girl sitting on a bench in the park, and to cheer her up, he treated her with cotton candy. Teresa was not ready for a new relationship, but she was pleased with his heartwarming gesture. She did not immediately give vent to her feelings, but Owen was patient and persistent, and soon they began dating. One day she trusted him and told him about her bad experience in a relationship. "What a wretch!" exclaimed Owen in anger. How can it be possible to beat a woman? And how dare he lock you in an apartment? I'm happy that it's all over and grateful to God for meeting you, smiled Teresa and hugged the man. And so today was exactly 1 year since they had met, and Owen, as Teresa had expected, proposed to her. After the cruel and despotic Frederick, Owen, who surrounded the girl with care and attention, was for Teresa the best man on earth. Of course she said yes, and a delighted Owen informed her that his mother, who had been waiting a long time to meet his son's sweetheart, was flying in tomorrow. Teresa, my son told me so much about you that I couldn't wait to meet you. Mrs. Morris grinned as they were sitting in a restaurant the next day. You're really not only beautiful, but you're intelligent. Teresa blushed. It's a pleasure to meet you too. I'm sorry your husband couldn't come, replied Teresa, and for a moment she thought the woman grew dark at those words. But she quickly pulled herself together. Yes, he's busy as usual, she said, and looked hopefully at her son, as if looking for his support. Owen frowned, and Teresa noticed that the subject made him uncomfortable. Mum, we're not going to adjust to him. The wedding is soon. He will be able to get acquainted with Teresa there. It is not necessary, Owen replied, and changed the subject of the conversation. When he accompanied his mother to the airport, she told him that she really liked Teresa. Mrs. Morris noticed at once that Teresa was smart, well-mannered, and sensitive. She was especially impressed by her knowledge of modern art. Owen was flattered and told her that Teresa really did come from a very nice but modest family. And he also planned to pay for Teresa's education at the art academy. This news made Mrs. Morris happy, and she wished her son good luck. Teresa was completely immersed in the wedding preparations and felt incredibly happy. Owen tried to do everything so that his bride would have the most amazing dress, an incredibly beautiful cake, and a celebration in one of the best restaurants in the city. Do we have enough money, Owen? Asked Teresa worriedly. This whole thing with the wedding costs some crazy money. It seems to me that you went into debt to do all this for me. Wouldn't it have been better to have a more modest wedding? That's why I loved you. You were never interested in my finances, he said cheerfully, and kissed the girl gently on the nose. Owen, I'm not kidding. Why such a luxury? Let's celebrate quietly. What about the cafe where I work? Teresa, I thought we agreed that you would quit your job and go into education. I did not tell you, but I grew up in a very well-off family, and my mother will not forgive me if the wedding will be modest, Owen replied and smiled. Teresa looked at Owen in surprise. She couldn't believe that it turned out that she had been dating a rich man all this time. Of course, I'm not as rich as my mother, and I'm not used to counting on her money, so I recently opened my own architectural bureau and am developing it, continued Owen. But of course I will not refuse my mother's help with our wedding, he laughed. Teresa still couldn't come to her senses. She had only recently been thinking about how they would pay off all the debts, and here was such an unexpected turn. She looked at Owen, who was delighted with the achieved effect, and jokingly shook her head. The wedding was going perfectly. Teresa had never seen so many sumptuously dressed, smiling people, and everything that was happening reminded her of shots from some movie. Teresa's parents felt uncomfortable at first, but Mrs. Morris surrounded them with such care and warmth that they gradually relaxed. Raising her glass to the newlyweds, she apologized that her husband would join them later, as soon as he landed and arrived from the airport. It was halfway through the evening when he finally showed up. Teresa was just standing next to Owen chatting with the guests when her mother-in-law came up and quietly touched Teresa on the shoulder. Darling, I want you to meet Frederick, Owen's father. Teresa turned around, and at the same moment, She felt as if the earth was slipping from under her feet. She felt herself falling, but Owen picked her up in time. "Darling, what's wrong with you? Are you not well?" he asked worriedly. "Are you all right?" asked Frederick, pretending not to recognize her. Teresa said nothing and rushed out of the restaurant. She didn't care what the guests and Owen thought. She felt only a wild terror that gripped her heart and made her run faster and faster. Not knowing what she was doing, she went down to the embankment and, throwing off her shoes, stepped straight into the icy water. She could not believe that by some terrible coincidence, her husband's father turned out to be her tyrant. Not understanding why fate was punishing her, Teresa covered her face with her hands and sobbed. Owen saw Teresa just as she was stepping into the river. Getting afraid that she would do something irreparable, he ran even faster and then threw himself into the water. The girl didn't seem to understand what was going on around her and just stood there, all in tears. "Honey, what happened?" asked Owen in a hoarse voice and put his arm around Teresa's shaking shoulders. "Whatever happened, my love? I need to know. What's causing you such pain?" "It's him," the girl said simply, her lips turning blue with cold. "Your father is the man who was abusing me and from whom I escaped." The girl finally looked into her husband's eyes, and Owen saw in them the same pain and longing that had so struck him the day they had met in the park. His eyes darkened with hatred and anger, and his fists clenched so tightly that his knuckles turned white. "I'll kill him," he whispered, turning toward the restaurant. "I swear I'll kill him." He moved toward the restaurant, but Teresa stopped him. She knew that the only option for her was to go away for good. "Please, understand, I can never live with the knowledge that my husband's father is my abuser," the girl whispered bitterly. "Darling, he's not my father. He's my stepfather. I always knew he was with my mum only for the money, and I have never loved him. He responded to me in the same way. I tried to explain to my mother that Frederick wasn't worthy of her, but she was resilient, and even though she knew about his cheating, she always forgave. But she will never forgive cruelty. When she finds out how he abused you, she will throw him out of the house. I'm confident." He hugged Teresa tightly and persuaded her to go back to the guests and have a good time. After all, it was their wedding day, and Owen was not going to let this wretch ruin everything. And tomorrow they would deal with Frederick in the narrow family circle. The rest of the wedding went fine, especially since Frederick tried not to show his face to the newlyweds. The next day, Mrs. Morris, after learning what her husband had done to Teresa, gave her husband a grand scandal. "I've put up with your cheating for a long time, but you've crossed every line of reasonableness. Get out of here and never let me see you again. And remember, you have nothing. All your connections are my friends. From now on, you won't be welcome in any decent house, so the farther away you are, the better for you. And if you ever try to touch Teresa or Owen, you will be sorry." Frederick left the house with one suitcase. After a while, Teresa discovered that she was expecting twins. Everyone began to prepare for the addition to the family, and Mrs. Morris and Teresa's parents were constantly arguing over family dinners about what names they would give their grandchildren. "As if we are going to ask them," Owen smiled. "We'll choose our children's names ourselves," he whispered, and kissed the rounded belly of his beloved wife.